For those of you who don't know and aren't familiar with our channel, if you guys are familiar with our channel, you should know that we've been banging on the drum, particularly Brad, just about retail and how we're going to continue to see dominance from the retail sector. Nike has been lagging no longer after their earnings. Massive earnings beat. They crushed it. It was beautiful. I was looking through it this weekend in preparation for this. And we obviously did an earnings reaction, but we didn't really get into what the transcripts had said. So there's really good information in there. But one thing we talked about prior to the earnings was, listen, what COVID and the pandemic did for many companies, specifically retail, was it moved them towards e-commerce faster. And Nike was already moving in that direction, so they kind of had a bit of a head start. They end up crushing the e-commerce side.
Yep.
And then we said as we reopen, e-commerce isn't going to slow down. So when people go back into the stores, which Nike has such brand loyalty, they should still see that traffic. Those two things come together and you'll see it go off. I think that's what we had here. So the stock was up 16%. That is the highest one-day increase since 1987.
Holy
October
shit.
of 1987.
That's crazy.
So you got to put that into perspective because you're talking about a stock that's been around for a long time, and
Yeah.
we would consider it a value stock, I would say. So stocks like this don't move 16%. So that's insane. I see that's like the equivalent of the Zoom move last year was up like 40%.
Yeah, we talked about how Nike, even though it was retail and a retail stock and maybe isn't widely considered a quote unquote value stock, it still is, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Probably in that vein, which most value stocks, they're not as volatile as your growth stocks are. And this had that type of move last week.
Yeah, so the only real thing I want to bring up from the earnings in particular was the increased guidance we talked about. There was one piece of maybe bearish information in there, which was China.
Yeah.
China, the only metric it missed on was China revenue, which it slightly missed. So for China, it did grow 17%, which is the largest growth of any market.
Yeah.
However, they were expected to come in at 2.25 billion in revenue. They came in at 1.9. So they missed, it wasn't really that close. And so if you want to look at something like bearish, that would be the bearish case. Also, has the move been made? I really think the question I want to answer that I'm asking to you is, when's the time to get in? Should you wait for a pullback? Have we missed it? Do we move on? But Jordan Brand, one of the things that came out was they had 31% growth. Jordan Brand's revenue last year was $5 billion.
Yeah.
And so putting that into perspective, it could be $6 billion this year, and the company may do $50 billion in revenue on the high end. Like, that's a pretty ambitious number.
Yep.
So for Jordan Brand to just deliver $6 billion this year is absolutely insane, and that brand's going to continue to grow. That brand could be it's its own entity, but you could make that a publicly traded company, and they're going to continue to grow and
Yes,
crush.
100%. And I think that for me, like, we saw from May's retail sales report that everything kind of slowed down in retail. There was two areas of the market that didn't and actually increased in spending, and that was hospitality, food and drink, and the clothing.
Yeah.
So and a lot of that has to do with, and we've talked about this, not just people going back to the office, but I mentioned specifically, especially when it comes to athleisure, you got kids going back to playing team sports again. Yeah. And that is a huge chunk of revenue. To your point, I think the Jordan Brand, that all plays into that.
Yeah.
And so we're seeing monster retail numbers for the month of May. I imagine that we're going to see an even bigger increase for the month of June. Barron's put out a report that said, the month of May, the retail sales fell 1.3% month over month, except for in the two sectors, which were the hospitality and retail. And we've been talking about this, right? And one of the stocks that I actually have coming up on our 5 stocks to watch this week is in the hospitality area. And they have earnings this week. I think it'll be very interesting to see how the market responds, because these areas in the market, even though we're starting to see spending return to them in a dramatic way, they're still lagging the market in certain areas. I mean, we're looking at Nike. Nike was downtrending this whole quarter until everybody was like, oh my God, I couldn't believe how much they were growing. But we've been talking about this. This is, I think, as far as Nike's concerned, I think it could be the spark that we see across retail and even in hospitality as well.
Yeah, for sure. And one of my stocks is to this retail place. I think there's two thought process here, which is, do you try to get in Nike now and you chase?
Yeah.
Which, if you're talking about from a long-term investing perspective, getting in is a no-brainer because it's going to continue to do well.
Yeah.
But then, what are the implications going to be for other companies and who to look at? I'm currently in Lululemon.
Yeah.
So this makes me reevaluate where I'm at. I'm about up 12% on the stock. It definitely makes me think twice about how I'm going to trade this stock from the long-term swing trading perspective, because now I got to think about, okay, what do I expect from next earnings, and will sort of the ripple effect from Nike end up impacting other stocks? So I'm excited about a stock I want to get in. I would look for Nike on a pullback. It'd have to be a pretty substantial pullback.
I agree.
But I will be getting into a retail stock, one of my top 5, because of Nike and because I feel so strongly about apparel in general. So my question really to you is, we look at the technicals. Can we pull up the chart?
Yeah.
Where would you expect a pullback this week? And where would you feel would be a good entry if you were getting into this?
Yeah, I mean, we look at this chart is hilarious. Look at the gap up. This is a daily chart, guys. So you can see the gap up. We talked about this last Stock Watch Sunday. This is why Nike was on our watch list for last week. And I had mentioned, this coming up and potentially breaking up over this chart. Now, I didn't expect it to break up over this downtrend like this, obviously. But you got to ask yourself, is this gap up warranted? And in certain ways, I think it is. I think that at some point there probably could be some profit taking, maybe perhaps coming back down to 150. You can make an argument for perhaps 147, but really, Fat Man Zoom, I don't know, man. I mean, with those kind of numbers, it seems to me that this seems fair. Like, this kind of move seems reasonable, even though it's a monster move for Nike. If there is a pullback, which we know that there always is, then yes, I would say it's probably worth grabbing the dip on. Yeah. But I would not be surprised if we didn't see much of one from Nike next week.
Yeah, depending on where the move is, I may try to make a play at Nike, but I don't think logically you would say, okay, retesting all-time highs as the support. So let's say, or 52-week highs, which is like 147, 148, whatever.
Yeah.
So if I really wanted to get into it, I'd be like, okay, it falls under 150, but I don't think so. I think I want to wait to see if it goes below 140.
Yeah.
And test the high end of the trend for the past couple months. And so if it gets below 140, I'd really feel like I'd feel compelled to get into it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we'll see what happens. But Nike, nonetheless, man, again shows why it is king.